I'm just looking for workflows. So, okay.
Alrighty. So yeah. Oh, sorry. Hey.
Right.
Yeah. So just for the purpose of the video, I'm Sean. I'm an engineering manager for the Plan backend team at GitLab, and I'm here chatting with Thomas.
Yep. Engineering manager for Secure, backend engineering team.
Cool. So, and Thomas, you've got some data you want to collect from other teams, basically.
Yeah. Okay. So the question that I'm coming to for this call is, how do other teams use the planning features within GitLab to effectively plan their next releases? Now, so that's the data point. Here is the pain or the problems that we're experiencing within Secure that has been mitigated a little bit recently, but at the same time, we're still struggling. In that, within the Secure stage, we're effectively tracking 7 top-end features with 7 engineers. And the reality of it is that each of those features require a different skill mix. So it makes it hard to use one board in order to effectively plan out and do a priority order. And we can't do Kanban style, which to me is what the issue boards lend themselves to.
Right. So you just pick a thing off the top, essentially.
Yeah, we can't, because not only do the features require different skills, what it's led to is that the skills held by the engineers on the team are unevenly distributed. So so inevitably what's going to happen is I'll have engineers who will be looking for the next feature to pick up in the prior order, and they can't because they don't have the skills necessary to effectively resolve the problem. So this particular problem, for a pain point for us, has been mitigated somewhat in that we have split the stage into 2 backend engineering teams, allowing each team to effectively focus on 3 or 4 things, as opposed to every engineer having to focus on 7 things. So that'll allow us to more.
So there's a clean cut between those 2 teams, right?
Yeah, there's a clean cut, and there's some shared aspects of it. We're working that part out, but what it's going to allow us to do is to specialize a bit more, and it should even out the skills matrix on each individual team as we move forward. But I'm still left with that same question: how are other teams using the features within GitLab to plan their releases, and can we learn from that and do better ourselves? So that's what I'm coming with.
Sure. So the first thing I should say is that we don't have the same problems you do, the same challenges you do, in the sense that in terms of the stages at GitLab and what the sort of technical requirements are for each of them, like Plan is one where it's a fairly homogeneous skill set that's needed. So like, there is expertise needed in different areas, but those are mostly either domain expertise or the technological expertise is like something that's quite easy to share. It's not the case where we don't normally have a case where there's literally 1 or 2 people on the team who can work on this thing. So right now the team's 10 people. Most of them can work on most things pretty effectively. So that makes it a lot easier. So we've got a few different ways we plan things. I'm actually just going to share my screen real quick, because that will probably help as well. Yeah, so what we do is we go from, so each of these is in priority order, and we go from right to left. This is just for the product manager. So the big problem we have is that we want to get that Kanban style, but the only place at the moment you can drag and drop issues is on a board, and this monitor's not tiny, it's reasonably big, but I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 issues on the screen at once, which is hard to do prioritization with. So the PM will put things over here. So bugs will typically be higher priority than technical debt, will typically be higher priority than general features, but they can put specific feature labels. They can move the list over here if they want to, so they haven't this time, but they can do in general. And then from a backend perspective, it is pretty much just a classic sort of Kanban style that you mentioned, where I use this board mainly just to see what people are working on, but it's also useful for seeing what's left. So what this board shows is just the list of issues in priority order. So that's retrofitted from the previous one because like the different lists don't have a relationship to each other. So I have to go and drag these around manually. And then we can see what each person's working on and yeah, go from there. So the idea there is that like this board is just scoped to backend and then it has assignee lists. So it's more for me to use as a manager to see like, okay, well, who's got what on at the moment? Like, is someone overloaded? Is someone underloaded, or if someone's going on vacation, like, you know, maybe they should be trying to like wrap stuff up rather than take new stuff. One thing we're actually adding this release relating to what I was just saying is that so we're going to add a manual option to the issues list page. So like, you know, this page. So this will show the same sort order that would be in the board. And then from this, you'll be able to drag and drop and do the same ordering that you could do in the boards. Because at the moment, that ordering is global across the entire project or group in this case. Okay. It doesn't depend on the board you're in. So that's what we're doing to make that easier as well, because these are, you can fit more on the screen here. And then if you can drag these around, then you can take that order to the board, or the order will take across to the board automatically. And you'll be able to do that better. So, and it will also display 100 issues at a time when you're in manual sort instead of the default 20, just to make that easier as well. Because obviously with 20, even with 100, but like it reduces the problem. With 20, the problem is if you want to move issue 21 to position 20, like how do you do that? Because they're on different pages. So that's the main way we work. In terms of like what would work for secure, it's hard for me to say. I think.
Well, let me focus it here real quick. So this is great from as far as monitoring execution within a release, and it speaks to what PM is looking at from prioritization. Couple of questions. One, and I'm showing my naiveness on how the boards work here.
Sure.
So my understanding is that each column, so each column is based off of one thing. So in this case, you've got it based off of assignee as opposed to tag, as an example.
Yes, although you can mix them. So we've got one here for right at the end for community contributions. So basically, if a member of the wider community is working on an issue, we want to track that in our milestone, but we don't want it to show up in this list because people shouldn't be trying to pick that up because somebody's already working on it. And normally for those, we also don't care so much if they slid. Because they weren't scheduled in the first place. Normally, they were just like something that somebody from the wider community decided to work on.
Okay. And my also understanding is that an issue will show up in one and only one column.
No.
No, it won't.
Yeah, let me find an example. So if this issue was assigned to Felipe and Yaka, it would show up in both. Same for labels. The only ones where you can guarantee that they will only show up in one column are when you are using these scoped labels, which are mutually exclusive, or when you're using a milestone list, which again, an issue can only have one milestone. So property of the field that you're using to set the column, not a property of the board itself.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, I was my understanding was wrong, so that's what I wanted to ask. Okay. The next question that I have is when it comes to actually doing release planning itself. How are you working with PM from these boards to understand what you can actually commit to doing versus what you're going to aspire to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we mostly use weight, and I don't think we have it documented anywhere, but it's basically just like, you know, this sort of basic, like one is like super trivial, like probably takes as much time to write the issue as it does to fix the issue. Two is like, you know, this should take you like, you know, a small amount of time, but isn't a major issue. Three is you know, this is a fairly substantial issue, but not like, it's not going to take over your whole month. It's like, you know, you're going to be able to do a few of these in the month, but you're not, you know, it's not trivial. And five is, this probably will take over a good chunk of your month, and anything bigger than five, we try and avoid, basically. So, you know, it's not scientific. It's just to give us an idea of capacity overall. So I don't really care about the weight on these assignee lists as much as I care about, like, just when we start the milestone, how much total weight do we have? How does that compare to previous milestones? And one thing we've not been doing is tracking this very well, except in like Google Docs and stuff. I think it's something I probably want to add to our handbook page or something in the future to give a better idea of like what our capacity is. But that's the way we do it. So another feature we're actually talking about adding is this line.
Oh yeah, the capacity line. Okay.
Yeah, so Chrome remembered a redirect from Google for that issue instead of just the actual issue. But yeah, like, just adding this line that says like, okay, well, this point is where I think the capacity is for this list. So it's not scientific at all. Like, this is not like based on a huge amount of data. It's just based on like iterating and like seeing what's there. As we add more people as well, like it becomes hard to balance that because I think I can't remember who I was talking to. I was talking to somebody else about this yesterday. Like, you almost need like a model for like when someone new joins the team, because that you can't just increase your capacity by like one person immediately. You sort of like phase it in over time, right? Like their first month, they're probably not here for the whole month. They're getting up to speed with everything. They've got a bunch of onboarding tasks to do. They're trying to figure out how the code base works. And then month 2, they're getting a bit more into it. And then months like 3, 4, 5, and 6, like, sort of become more regular months. So, yeah, we don't have any model for that, is what I'm saying. Like, it's a good idea, but we don't have it. So it's not very scientific. It's just looking at like what happened previously. I don't think we've ever added more than one person in a new month, which has also helped with that. So yeah. And what I would really like to do eventually is just do it based on issue count and be confident that all of the issues are small enough weight that it doesn't matter. Like, which issues you pick up. Like, I've definitely seen like people suggest, so you can see, for instance, this bug has weight 3 and this bug has weight 2. I've definitely seen people suggest that all bugs should just be like the same weight, because you have a known like exit condition from a bug, which you don't necessarily do for a feature. Like, it's much more well defined. But I haven't done that basically.
Yeah, understood.
So yeah, and then for the front end, like they do the same thing. So this board is scoped by the backend label, but for the front end, they do the same exercise. I don't know if they use the weights in exactly the same way, but they figure out like, what I see from the front end manager is like, they will say like, we have this much weight. We reckon we can take this much weight. We are under/over for this milestone. But the numbers are sort of deliberately opaque in that sense. Like, as long as they're consistent for each team from month to month, it doesn't matter that they're consistent across teams so much.
Okay. All right. So traditional agile velocity planning poker beginnings or equivalents. Okay.
And here I weight most of the issues myself. Like, I try and involve the team more, but just because like I've been at GitLab for a while and I have a lot of context for a lot of these issues, sometimes I just think, well, maybe it's easier for me to do this than interrupt my team. But I do try and involve the team more, because sometimes I get it quite badly wrong, normally on the underside. Like, I don't think I read a post about this recently, like how, because the effect of overestimation is like bounded. So like, if you think something's going to take 3 days and it takes like 1 day, like it can't take like less than 0 days, right?
Yeah.
But it's unbounded on the other end. Like the mean tends like way higher than you expect because of that. Because like you might expect something takes a week and it takes a year, and all of a sudden that just completely blows out the mean for your estimations there. So yeah. And then there was going to be another point I was going to make there, which I have now forgotten. So I'll hand back to you.
Sorry.
Okay. It's all right. No, I think I derailed myself.
No, you're good. Okay. Alrighty. So restating what I think I heard. So right now, using weights, and you have some idea, but of what total weight the team can take on in a given month. And as long as everything is in priority order, you can determine if you've got too much or if you got too little based off of how things have been weighed, and therefore that's how you know what you can commit to.
Yeah, and the nice thing about the pick a thing off the top of the list style as well is like, you don't need to care so much if you've got exactly the right weights and capacity, because if you were a little bit over optimistic and you can't actually do everything in this release, like if we don't get to this item way at the bottom here, it was way at the bottom, we'll put it at the top of the next release, but it's not like, that's not a catastrophe. Like the product manager has already put the issues in the order that they've determined like highest priority, and then it's our job to like make that reasonably predictable for them that like if I put this at the top of the list, it will be done like sooner than something at the bottom of the list, essentially.
Okay.
Because obviously like people won't necessarily always pick the exact top item. Like sometimes they might go down one or two, because you have the whole thing where this might be weight 3 for one person and weight 5 for somebody else because they don't know how our GraphQL implementation works. So it takes them longer than somebody who's already used it, for instance. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any issue? Do you allow any issues to come into a release that span teams? And what I mean by that, back end, front end work will be required to deliver it.
So sorry, issues that span the back end and front end team.
Yes.
Yes, but we try to actually that shouldn't have front end. We try to limit those. So in this case, actually, Brett's got 2. So you can see that there's a front-end engineer assigned here as well as a back-end engineer in both of these cases. These do have, you've got the coordination problem, right? Like it's a lot of the time, like for this one, for instance, View Epic Tree and Epic, this is the kind of issue where like we couldn't really write the back end and then like deliver that to the front end and get them to work on it. We needed to like collaborate and figure it out as we go along, because the way we were building that API was using GraphQL and we were still sort of figuring out how we wanted to use that for this thing. And also the feature itself, like I think, we had a few questions about like how we'd build it as we went along, which is fine. But as you can see, it missed the original target, partly because of that like extra coordination needed, right? Like the less you need to sync up with people, the faster you can go in general. So we do have a few of those. We generally find it works okay because the priority, like I said, is the same across different boards. So like if it's at the top of the back-end list, it'll probably be quite close to the top of the front-end list. We do sometimes have issues of capacity though, where like there is nobody from back-end available to take this issue that somebody from front-end is working on. Or actually more typically the other way around, just because the back-end team on plan is much bigger than the front-end team on plan. But yeah, we do have that coordination problem. We try not to have too many issues that need both back-end and front-end input in the same release to like avoid too much risk there. Because like when you have 2 teams working on the same issue, that increases the risk, which we talked about before.
Yeah. Okay. Do you take the step, and this is procedurally, this is a procedural question. Do you take the step of naming someone to be a single directly responsible individual for things that span front end and back end?
That's a good question. So let me just answer a slightly different question first of all.
Yeah.
So I know that some teams at GitLab like pre-assign issues. So instead of doing like this where like anybody can just pick anything, they will say like, okay, well, Felipe is going to take this issue, Jaak is going to take this issue, Brett's going to take this issue, and so on. We don't do that generally, but for these issues that require coordination, we do try to get those assignees, like if they're near the top of the list and they need back end and front end, we do try and get those assignees locked in fairly early. And I would say typically the person owning it is the person who is doing the most work, if that makes sense. So I think this issue is slightly bigger on the back end than the front end. So the back end engineer is owning it, for instance. That's sort of how it's worked out in practice. You might also just say like, You might also just say, well, back end will typically own it because they are blocking front end, or front end will own it because without the front end, the feature can't be done. Or you might say whoever's the most senior will own it, but we don't have a formalized process around that. But yeah, from my perspective, I'm always just going to talk to the back-end engineer about it. Well, I say always. Yep. Obviously, I will talk to the front-end engineer about it, but from my perspective, like what I care about is like what my team are doing, and I will consider them the DRI for the issue, even if they consider themselves blocked on somebody else, basically.
Okay. Yeah. 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 Of course.
Yeah.
This is an idea that's been rattling around in Secure. It's like, do we
Okay.
go to the point of naming a directly responsible individual for every single issue? Obviously, if there's one assignee, you're it. But if there's 2, 3, or 4 assignees, who's really running the show?
Yeah, and for this one as well, like there's 3 assignees because there's also the UX, the product designer, and they will have a big input here as well because they'll also be involved on the MR, and they have been saying like, well, do we need to include this? Like, is this a cut scope thing or is this a keep thing? I think it should work like this. So I see where you're coming from because with 3 people, obviously there's definitely a case for everybody to think a bystander effect, right?
Yeah.
Everybody thinks somebody else is the DRI.
Okay. All right.
Cool. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, this is very helpful. Thank you.
So yeah, basically, I think what I said is like how we do things, and also why that might not work for Secure if you just try to do that directly, because you have like some additional challenges that we don't have. But if you have any features or any like questions about how this part of the product works, or like you want it to work in a different way, one of the great things about working on a product like GitLab that you use every day is that you can like submit the feature proposal or whatever and say like, well, I need it to work this way, and I'm an internal customer. There's a label for that. That means like we should treat it as a high priority. So it's not just like you're sort of giving feedback to a company and you never know if it's going to be resolved. You're giving feedback to your own company, and it still might not be resolved, but you have more visibility of the process.
Yeah, and I think I'm approaching the point where I'm ready to start doing some of that. At this time, I want to learn context because there's a definite opinion on how everything has been built thus far, and I'm making sure that I understand the context and the opinion of what's there to see how it meshes with my own thinking and if I need to change first. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Also, just a personal perspective, not as like the plan engineering manager, but just as sort of a general engineering manager. I quite like that different teams can do this slightly differently. We all have the same like expectations in terms of like dates, like our milestones are a month long. Our feature freeze date is the same for every team, but we don't have to do exactly the same process in each team because that lets us like find the process that works best for each team. I think it's more important to have the right process that works for the particular team than it is to have the same process as every other team.
Agreed. But tooling can help or hurt depending upon how far you go.
Absolutely. Like if your process needs like custom fields, for instance, then you're going to have a hard time with that with GitLab because we have labels, but we don't have custom fields right now. Yeah.
Agreed. Okay. Well, this answered my questions at the moment. So
awesome.
So thank you. I'm going to hold you to a handbook entry on weights and guidance and how you're using them. So.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'll just put something quick on the plan page because I don't think it applies across different teams. But I'll just be saying like this is how we in the back end use these weights, and then people can see that. And also, as I hand this out to the team as well, like it gives me a point where I can say like, well, can you weight this according to these rules, rather than what I'm doing, which is saying like, can you weight this according to these rules that I've just told you in Slack, which is not really how we're supposed to communicate at GitLab.
Yeah, agreed. And I was defaulting to the same way. The way that I would just to share the way that I was interpreting weight was a definition is really what I brought over from previous company, the way I was doing it before, and I was interpreting it a weight to be person days or engineer days would be a better way of looking at it. And where I was asking for t-shirt sizes. Is this extra small? Is this small? Is medium, large, all the way to double XL? And with a common understanding of it's extra small, this is going to take a day. If it's small, this is 2 days. If it's medium, it's going to take a week, and so forth. You can see where it's going from there. And using that for weights, but it's not translating well. And so I wanted to see how you're using it and see if there's a way that I can adapt and make our planning process easier. Because right now it's we're not doing it well, so we need to change.
Actually, just on that last point real quick, because I've got another meeting coming up. Well, probably the same meeting. The thing with days I find at GitLab is because we're so asynchronously focused, is that it's hard to predict when a particular merge request will be necessarily merged, or which means when a particular issue will be closed. But we are very efficient at getting sort of bandwidth through, like not so much latency for a particular issue, but like our bandwidth is very high. And that's why like times, I think, are kind of a hard concept for that, because like once you hand it over to somebody for review or somebody to like work on the front end for it, like, are you expecting them to follow the same timeline? It's kind of fuzzy.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And that's what I was running into. Exactly. You stated it much more elegantly and efficiently than I could at this point. I hadn't been able to pinpoint down the language just yet, but yeah, no, this is good. This is helpful.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much, Thomas. I'll
Thank you.
post this on YouTube very shortly.
Okay.